Good morning. I would like first to thank the Middle East Policy Council for this gathering and for this debate. I would like to focus my remarks on the changes needed in the US foreign policy vis-à-vis the countries going through what was called the Arab Spring, now the Arab Awakening. And I would like to first say that we went through lots of up and downs since the revolution of last year. I say we from an American approach, we saw the Tahrir protests as the sign of democracy that we thought were not there. Then after the elections, we were disappointed by the victory of Islamists. And in the last 6 months, so we went from enthusiasm to disappointment, and now we are in the pessimist phase, in the sense that recent events like the protest against the anti-Mohammed movie have led some of the analysts and policymakers to link the failure of the Arab Spring with this unfortunate episode. So my talk will really focus first on the fact that democracy is a value that is now shared by the majority, especially the young people of all Muslim majority societies. Does it mean that it's a democracy we experience in the West, and especially in the US? Probably not. And we have to be aware of that. And based on this assessment, I would like to draw a few elements for changes in foreign policy. In some way, the West, and that's what the Arab Spring showed, the West is victim of its success, in the sense that the Jasmine Revolution and the Tahrir protests show that now the democratic values are not anymore, I would say, Western. And this has not been thought through sufficiently. I mean, we are not paying attention enough to the fact that democracy is persistently praised by members, citizens of Muslim majority countries. There are tons of pollings showing that, multiple pollings that repeatedly show that actually in some instances when they are polled, these people say that they are more in favor to democracy than the average of respondents you can find in a Western country. And this hope in democracy is still there despite the, I would say, the questioning or the skepticism around the new regime that came from elections. So people also disconnect the limits of the new regime with this hope for democracy. And I think it's important to maintain this positive outlook on what's going on. And we tend, unfortunately, to go very quickly from one assessment to another without taking into account indicators that are there. The fact that Muslim societies were in favor of democracy, we knew that, at least as scholars, for a long, long time. This didn't come with the Arab Spring. It was already there in facts and investigation that are available to everybody. So this is the first thing. The second point here is, but what kind of democracy are we talking about? And in this regard, I would like to make a difference between what is shown as a consensus, which is the principle of political freedom of political expression and opposition. In other words, the fact that rulers have to be elected, that they can change from one election to another, is now pretty much grounded in the majority of these countries. Does it mean that we are witnessing a sort of secularization in the American sense of this country? Probably not. Probably not. So we have also to disconnect a few elements that we have considered as the whole package of democratization, which is democratization goes with secularization and goes with decline of religion in public space. And this we have to be very aware that this is not happening. And in this sense, the protest against the anti-Muhammad movie show us that Islam remains a very strong marker of the public space, which from the West is always difficult to understand because we think that religion is private, that religion concerns only our beliefs. We're going to have to understand, and it's not true only for Muslims, it's true, I could talk to you about India in the same way. We're going to have to understand that for Muslims, Islam is not only a question of belief, it's also a question of belonging and being a national citizen. What do I mean by that? It is not because, as I hear everywhere, that Islam doesn't separate politics and religion, which is actually looking at the Islamic tradition wrong. But it is that since the building of the nation states, even by very secular elite that we used to work with, like Mubarak or Ataturk or Bourguiba, Islam has been embedded in the building of nation state. What do I mean by that? It's not only mentioning Islam in the constitution. It is also creating connection between being a national and being a citizen. And again, this didn't come from Islamists. What we are witnessing is how the new regime led by Islamists have to work within a framework that already was there. So again, the blasphemy law were not an invention of the recent regime. They were already there. Today it's a major debate in Tunisia about how to remove laws that sanction people who would say something insulting against the prophet or the religion. This was already there under the secular Bourguiba and Ben Ali regime. So again, we have to be very careful on how we assess this kind of events in a more, I would say, complex picture, where instead of looking at Islamists as a separate entity challenging secular states, we have to take into account what are the state institutions, what are their situation today that also influence the interaction with the Islamists. And I think we have not done that, and it requires a very different outlook on what's going on, meaning accepting that indeed democratic values are shared now beyond the West, but does it mean that everywhere we're going to witness a duplication of the American model of democracy? Probably not. Does it mean that then we reject the whole experience? It would not be a wise move. And this brings me to my second point on what does it mean for the US foreign policy. We are at a time now where talking about promotion of democracy is very, I would say, criticized or rejected. And I understand why, because if you look at the popularity of the US in this part of the world, you see a consistent and repeated decline of positive opinion vis-à-vis the US. And there have been lots of assessment of previous attempts to promote democracy, so I'm not going to go there. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that we have to abandon or renounce to a promotion of democracy. So it means not promoting values, not considering that the West has to teach democracy to the other parts of the world, but to create some kind of partnership. And this is possible because this has been done by US administration, particularly in the Eastern European context. You can see how a successful democratization policy worked in the Eastern European context by two elements that maybe we can learn from and invest in Muslim majority country. It was establishing a good communication with the target audience in a functioning marketplace of ideas. And I think this is missing in the way we are dealing with Muslim majority countries. Of course, since the Arab Spring, we are aware that communication matters. Actually, we are, I would say, too much aware of it because now the social media have become the panacea to solve everything. While the social media, and I know there have been a lot of investment in the current administration to communicate through this channel with different segments of civil societies in the Muslim world. But what do we communicate? What are we paying attention to? And I would say here that words are loaded. When we say democracy again, it may not mean the same thing for someone living in Rabat or Tunis. When we hear the term Sharia, it doesn't mean what we are afraid of here, which is, you know, the imposition of a medieval barbaric code of law. And again, we don't make enough effort to clarify this kind of, you know, heavy loaded terms in any communication with this part of the world. I remember when the new transitory regime in Libya took over, one of the first declarations was, we're going to impose Sharia in the country. And this was, you know, considered as very, very worrying from the Western eye. While what does Sharia mean there? I mean, maybe it means, and I can explain this a little more in detail, maybe in Q&As, it may be simply principles, like, you know, the 10 Commandments. If in the US some politician will refer to the 10 Commandments, it would not be seen as, you know, a backward move toward the religious state. So maybe Sharia is used this way. And in this particular context, Tunisia is a very good example of this move from reference to principle from imposition in concrete law of what would be Sharia. I think this is also important to watch and just not take at face value what people are saying, because there is a lot of relationship of power in the use of words. I know this may not sound too realistic in terms of international relations, but symbolic matters. And we have not paid attention enough to the symbolic aspect of the communication with this part of the world. And so incidents are adding up, you know, from the Quran desecration to, I would not consider the anti-Mohammed movie as, you know, something that was part of US foreign policy, but we have to deal with it, okay? And its apology is good, but this is, I would say, a very reactive approach, while we need to be much more proactive in the way we communicate. So what does this mean? If we want to target audiences or actors that can promote a vision of democratization that include not only free and fair elections, but other elements like pluralistic approach of society, we have to change also the way we interact as a multiple set of institutions and governmental agencies with this country. We have given too much priority to the leaders. And it's true that in the current administration also there is effort to diversify, and there have been before also using, you know, NGOs. But then it turns into a very compartmentalized approach, with one hand of the administration doing one thing with NGOs and another hand doing something else with the state. And sometimes these two elements do not add up or do not come into synergy. And it's, I think it's in some way very heartbreaking from an American point of view, because we put a lot of money through all this action in this particular part of the world. What comes back is from the society is we are doing nothing. So again, how do we make this work in a way that is more transparent, that is more coordinated? And this goes with the vows and wishes of the population. You know, they toppled Mubarak and Ben Ali because they wanted transparency, because they wanted a more equal distribution of resources. So it means also maybe thinking of another way that instead of doing one thing here and another thing here, create platforms and make, you know, the different way that American is involved with the country meet each other. To give a concrete example, it did happen in American policy. When in Sudan, you can object, and I would take the objection. In Sudan at the time of reconstruction, this is a very successful example of the convergence and synergy of multiple administrative and political units of the US administration coming together to help rebuild the country, and also bringing different elements, not only state institutions, but also civil societies movement. And in this sense, there is a lot to think of. So the point would not be to add or increase the aid. It would be more about thinking of creating spaces or interfaces that would make this help much more efficient, and that would also change the outlook of the US in this part of the world. I think that focusing only on state work is counterproductive, because again, the state is seen as biased, and our previous speaker explained why the bias is there. But there is a huge resources that Americans are not using enough, which is the American society itself. I was very surprised. I did a lot of focus groups of American Muslims when they live in the US. And coming from Pakistan, Egypt, or Iraq, the first thing that they discover is the energy, vibrancy of Americans. And they tend to dissociate between, you know, the US foreign policy and American society. And most of them, all of them, are very positive on that. And every time they tell in these groups, we didn't know, because we see only, you know, the foreign policy aspect. So there is something here in terms of communication also that could be helpful. So what does it mean? It means also multilateralism. I know this is not very popular, but it may work too, because also looking at what the EU is doing in this part of the world, lots of initiatives could be put together, and especially in Libya now or in Tunisia. And again, the most extremist or resistant actors play on the division, not only of their own politicians, but also of the division and compartmentalized work of the West in these different parts of the world. So again, the idea of platforms here is something to think of, and it has been working in some cases. To finish up, I would like to say that the work is huge, because it means thinking of how we interact or engage from the very concrete aspects of who does what in these different parts of the world. One, it also means being able to identify locally, and not only through the internet. The internet is nice, but it gives a very deceptive approach of what people are doing, you know. And I know it's, again, the social media doesn't make revolution. Education makes revolution. Urban middle class makes revolution, not the social media. And for that, we need to be more aware of indicators emerging, and who is doing what now in these different civil societies. And for that, I think that the need is a better understanding to be able to bring in skills. People in this part of the world, and I will finish really on that, are admiring the US for its capacity of education, for its capacity of entrepreneurship. I do not, I mean, of course, we can bring entrepreneurs from the Middle East to visit the US or vice versa. It doesn't create the positive cross-pollination with state institutions. How do we make this work? And this would be a very important way to build more secure societies, because as we know, democracies do not fight each other. So what I'm lining up here is some elements for a more long-term approach, which may be very frustrating, especially in time of elections, but on the long run, there are sufficient assets that could be used and we could start using right now to change the interaction with this part of the world. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.